I would like to welcome everybody to Transitions Opportunities Forum and Networking Expo. It's the largest annual event for the Pacific Northwest JET Alumni Association. PNW JET is the JET Alumni Association for Washington State, Northern Idaho, and Montana. And this year, the group is celebrating their 30th year. PNW JET is working with the United States JET Program Alumni Association, opening the Transitions Career event up to those across the United States and the world. I know we've had many people join us from Canada and Peru and other areas. Looks like we got somebody in Japan and yes, Minnesota, Nagoya, fantastic. US JET, if you don't know, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that furthers US-Japan understanding by supporting alumni of the JET program. And if you're not already a member of US JET, please join us for free at usjeta.org. There will be a link in the chat. This Transitions Forum is generously funded by Claire, who most of you are probably familiar with from your time in Japan. My name is Bahia Simons-Lane. I am the Executive Director of US JET, and I will be moderating the session tonight. All right, now I would like to turn things over to Emily.
All right, thank you, Bahia. I appreciate all of this, and I appreciate all of you for being here. So hi, everyone. I definitely saw some names rolling in that I recognized as we were getting started here. Definitely, please feel free to share those questions that you have. I always find that these things are so much more engaging if I have the questions from all of you. So definitely keep those questions rolling in. So here's the thing, right? We went to Japan. We had a great time. We maybe taught some ladies some eikaiwa, whatever it is that we did. By the way, the reason I have this crazy ass hair here is that it was in fact the 90s. You got my little vest here. You got my crazy hair. Dates me a little bit, but that is in fact when I did JET. So anyway, the reason you're probably all here right now is that you got back from Japan, and among other things, you realize that probably you don't really want to teach, or you can't figure out the manner in which you want to teach, and so there's just some kind of additional challenges that you have going on here. So we get to figure out what we do after that experience. So you all are probably familiar with this Ikigai Okinawan concept of figuring out kind of your life's purpose, your reason for being. And the reason I put it in here is that I think so many of us can get a little bit stuck in this trap of skills. I have been stuck in that skills trap, and it is not a fun place to be. The way I happen to do it, and some of you have heard this story from me before, is I got back, I thought, okay, I speak some Japanese, and what you do with that is you translate. And so all in good faith, I went off, found a job at a law firm translating documents about rubber patent infringement, and I have never been more miserable in my life. I was hyper-focused only on my skills. And what I like about this Ikigai image is that it really gives you a chance excuse me, to see what all of those things are, right? How it looks. I was just living right in here, pretty much. Skills and what you can be paid for. And I wasn't particularly good at it, so I didn't even have this kind of overlap here. And what I would really encourage all of you to do, and this is a single slide, and I realize that this is not really getting into great depth with this, but really think about all of these pieces of this. Really think about what you enjoy, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and how they're all going to overlap, because that's kind of where you need to start with this process. Now, again, I've said this in a single slide. I said it so it's easy. This is definitely the hard work that I would encourage you to do with this. And if you're having any struggles with this, which I suspect you may be, definitely feel free to reach out to me, because I can definitely talk to you a little bit more about what this looks like, what it means, and how you decide. I also want to throw in here something that a friend of mine once said when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up and kind of freaking out. This wise friend said, well, here's the thing. You never actually have to decide what you're going to be when you grow up, but at some point you have to decide what you're going to do next. So I would encourage you all to think about it that way as well. And definitely, as I said, let me know if you have questions about kind of figuring this out, because we can definitely do that together. Now, wow, that is much pinker than I thought when I was putting these together. Sorry. Once you've got that kind of sorted out, what I really would encourage you to do is think about what the skills are that you gained in Japan without focusing too narrowly. We tend to think of this as very kind of ABC, right? Like, I taught English. But the thing is, just by being in a different country, you learned all of these other things that are actually really big and meaningful, and that you can translate into a lot of different areas. And you'll see some examples later on about what this looks like. For example, I think a lot about how living in another country means that you have to do things like figure out how to pay your bills. And depending on sort of your specific circumstances in Japan, you may have had someone who showed that to you, and you may not. You may have had an ex-jet in your town before you who could say, here's what you do. Or you may have been left totally on your own, and you figured it out. You figured out a whole lot of things about living in another country. And even if you spoke some Japanese before you went to Japan, chances are that you didn't really speak the fullest language that you do now. And so you had to figure all of that out in a foreign language, even if it was only a little bit foreign. So think about that. Think about how the things you did can translate into so many different areas, and how those skills and abilities can overlap. Again, watch out for that skills trap. Don't get there. That's going to make you really unhappy. By the way, documents about rubber patent infringement, I suspect, are not interesting in any language. I guarantee you they're not interesting in Japanese or in English. And I had to sign a bunch of non-disclosure agreements, even though I actually have no idea what I could possibly disclose because I didn't actually understand it. Anyway, don't go there. Don't translate documents about rubber patent infringement. And as you're thinking about this, also, remember to loop in some of the extracurricular stuff that you did. A lot of us, for example, did some translation work. Many of us did some eikaiwa work, and you might find that you actually enjoy teaching adults more than you enjoy teaching kids, or vice versa. Club activities, anything you did outside of your kind of regular job is totally fair game as you're thinking about what those plans and skills are. Caveat, if you did something that you didn't enjoy doing, you don't have to say very much about it. Now, if you don't want to teach, and that's of course what you got paid for, you have to say a little bit about it, but you can really think about how those skills are going to translate more broadly into other things that you might do. So instead of really hyper-focusing on teach, educate, train, whatever, you can really think about how that kind of sharing of knowledge is impactful and less about the specific pieces of teaching and lesson planning, depending on kind of what you're interested in, what you want to do. So feel free to eliminate stuff that you really just didn't enjoy doing or that you don't want to have as repeat patterns in your work. I know not everyone likes this word, and I apologize, but it is the word. The other really key thing to do here is to reach out to your networks. I think a lot of people really fundamentally misunderstand what networking is, and that's where a lot of the fear comes from. So I would encourage you to start by thinking of networking as simply having conversations with other people. And that's definitely something that you all can do. You know, you made friends on JET, and some of those friends were your fellow English speakers, and some of your friends were Japanese. And so you get to really use those same skills. And so, you know, really think broadly about the kinds of people that you can connect with. You're just meeting people, and ideally you're meeting like-minded people. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to start making a list of people you already know, people who are already somehow in your circles, and how they might connect you with people you want to know. I encourage this to be a pretty free-form sort of brainstorming idea at the beginning. So you just write down anyone you can think of that you already know and any ways that they might be connected with people you want to know. Start there just because it's easy. That can be people like, you know, college professors or, you know, people you went to high school with, anyone you can think of like that who's just kind of already in your circle, as well as, of course, friends you still have from JET, friends you made in Japan, people like that. And so start writing those ideas down and kind of figuring out how those people might connect you with other people. If, on the other hand, there are definitely places you want to meet people, organizations you want to work for, or perhaps job titles that you're really interested in learning more about, and you realize that you can't quite figure out how to meet those people within the networks you already have, definitely feel free to use some social media. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a sec here, but it's a really nice, easy way to do some outreach to people and to make the process fairly painless for yourself. Again, I can answer specific questions, but let me get to that slide before we get too specific here. This is going to sound obvious, but don't forget, you have this really amazing network already kind of pre-built. Use US JET AA. I don't know if you've seen it before, but there actually is now an alumni directory on the site that's actually, it's not complete because not everyone has filled out their profile yet. So also fill out your profile there, but it's a really good starting place. And definitely look at your local JET AA chapters because those are really great ways that you can have those discussions. Bahia, if you want to jump in here and say anything about the alumni directory on the site, you are absolutely welcome to, but it's a really, really great resource. And I absolutely encourage you all to jump in to that profile and really fill it out. I'm in there. And so you can definitely find me if you have any questions for me, although my contact information is in here. And then, of course, what you want to do these days is ask people to virtual coffees. Obviously, you don't actually have to have coffee at these, but the idea of a virtual coffee is that it's fairly time limited. So you can have sort of a 20-30-minute discussion with these people that you're connecting with in a way that feels pretty comfortable and pretty natural. And, you know, that way you're not asking for like an hour and a half of their time. It doesn't feel like a giant deal to anyone, and you can just kind of reconnect. If these are people you know, then it's a little bit easier to kind of go through the process. If they're strangers to you, then you're definitely going to want to go through some of the questions that you want to ask them ahead of time, just so you have a sense of the flow. And in your documents, and also in the shared drive, you will see a document called Informational Interviewing. And this is going to walk you through some of the questions that you might ask to these people as you are getting to meet them. So I mentioned social media. You can be smarter or less smart on social media. This is just one of those lame book posts, but if you look up social media fail, you'll find dozens and dozens of examples of this one. I just happen to think it's hilarious for a couple of reasons. One is that Lizzie here in her reply to Taylor has said Dido. I suspect she means ditto, but I just find that kind of an extra hilarious bonus. But you'll see here that Taylor's complaining without realizing that Jeremy, the boss here, is actually a Facebook friend. Don't do this. Be super cautious. My rule of thumb, specifically with Facebook and those more friend type social media sites, is make sure that your posts are kind of passing the grandma test. If it's something that you think your grandmother wouldn't want to see, probably you shouldn't post it. And that's just kind of my benchmark. Now, we all sort of lose our minds every once in a while and post some stuff we're not entirely proud of. And yes, theoretically, once it's online, it lives there forever. Just do the best you can with this stuff, though, and try not to use places like Facebook as kind of ranting places or places to complain, because it can come up and, you know, just kind of bite you in the butt afterwards. What you can do is you can do some outreaching via sites like LinkedIn. And, you know, LinkedIn isn't necessarily perfect for everyone. It does depend on your profession. It depends on kind of what you want to get into. It depends on how comfortable you are with social media in general. But the reason I do like LinkedIn is that it's kind of hard to misbehave on the site, and it's really easy to find people that you want to connect with. There's actually a really nice way that you can find alumni from your various institutions. Real briefly, I can explain this to you afterwards if you have questions, but really briefly, in the search box here, you put in the name of your college or university. You get a little drop-down list. You choose the official looking one with the logo or whatever. And when you click on it, you'll see that you actually get a list of things that people you can look up on the page, and one of those is going to be alumni. Just click on that and you'll get a list of alumni. You can narrow it down by area. You can see about field. And that's a really easy way to connect with some people on LinkedIn I'm not saying don't use Facebook. I am saying that you just think really carefully about kind of the content that you're posting and all of that. And before we get into resumes, excuse me, I have a little throat tickle here. It's not COVID. I just want to check in and see if there are questions I can answer about these first steps we have gotten. I'm going to rely on our moderators here because I am really bad at looking at the questions and reading my slides at the same time. Yeah, are there any questions that have come in that I should get to sooner rather than later? No, we're good?
Keep
All
going.
Right. I'll keep going. And I'm talking kind of fast because I feel like we have a lot to cover. So if any of this is too fast, explain it more. After you figured out what you want to do, made some connections with people doing it, and really kind of thought through what it's going to look like for yourself, the next thing you'll need to do, of course, is to start applying. In order to apply, you're going to need a few key things. You're going to need your resume, obviously. I strongly recommend a cover letter. I'll tell you why in a sec. You're going to need some references, and you're going to need some form of social media presence. Again, editors tend to get extremely nervous when they see people applying for jobs and they cannot find them at all on social media. And so just make sure that you have some kind of social media presence that your potential employers can access, and just make sure that it is the image that you would like to portray on social media. A quick caveat here. Some of you will find, my name is Emily Frank, so I totally share your name. And it might even be a somewhat unusual name. You can't worry too much about that unless the person who shares your name is somehow someone that's very embarrassing to you. So if you do, in fact, share your name with someone famous or someone who's done something bad, one of the things that you can do to make your name come up higher in the search algorithms is actually do LinkedIn. Create a LinkedIn profile and be fairly active on the site, and the algorithms are going to pick that up, so you're going to come up higher in a search. It's not foolproof. If the person who shares your name is a mass murderer, that person is obviously going to keep getting more hits on social media than you are. But keep at the posting on LinkedIn, and eventually you'll rise higher. And people, the employers are going to be able to tell, likely, that you're not the mass murderer one, and so you'll come up a little bit higher in those searches. So that is a kind of cheat if you do share your name with someone else, and honestly, most of you will. The other Emily Frank that I happen to know is also a counselor by profession, and she lives in Denver. What are the odds? So we actually have both started using our middle names so that people don't get too confused by us. So just some things that you can do just to make sure that you are you in your social media presence. All right, so a lot of people have kind of basic questions about resumes. Why do you write one? They feel kind of redundant, right, in the 21st century when everything is theoretically out there. But there are still some basic reasons that you do it. Obviously, you want the employer to be interested in you. You want to demonstrate that you're interested in the specific job they've posted. You want them to have a place where they can go back to and kind of talk about your skills. And we want a document that gets you into an interview. Since 95% or maybe more of the places you're going to be applying for things, you're gonna have an electronic record. That record for the employers is really, really important. And what you'll find often is that there might be, let's say, a specific skill that they've asked for in the job description that you're lacking, but you've done something very similar to it. And that's, again, where that electronic record becomes so important, because the people who scored you high when they got your resume and said, oh, this is a person to interview, can then go back to that document and say, oh, look, but instead of that one thing we have asked for, this person has this. The other thing is, with the record keeping, you probably don't believe it if you've ever gotten one of those responses that was kind of, we'll keep you in mind if we have future job openings that match your skills better. Most people think that that's just kind of a super polite brush off, but there are times it is definitely not that. Ask around to your friends and family. I guarantee you, you'll find at least one person in that pile who's had a callback from an organization they applied to and got a no from, but they said, we'll keep your record on file. And then in fact, something did open up that seemed to fit that person's skills a little bit better. So don't feel like that's necessarily a no. It's a good thing. And if there is an organization that you really want to work for, having your resume in their records from a year or so ago is just going to work in your favor as they consider you for future jobs. But of course, the main reason you really want to submit your resume is to get that interview. I always say your resume is never going to get you a job. Your resume is a piece of paper. Even if it's electronic, it's a piece of paper. What's going to get you the job is you, and you're going to do that through the interview. So remember that that is the main purpose of your resume. I'm going to get into some detail here in a bit. If you have questions about cover letters, fear not, that's coming as well. So there are essentially, this is oversimplifying, but essentially there are three broad categories of resume that you can think of. And if you are in academia or medicine, or have a lot of, or are seeking a lot more experience working overseas, I'll mention that I'm really just talking here today about US format resumes and not CVs. Though if you have questions about CVs, let me know. If you do have specific CV questions, let me know what it's for, because they do tend to differ field to field. That said, US format resumes have kind of three basic types. I'm going to encourage you all to really focus on the chronological and combination format resumes and to skip the functional, and I'll define those a little bit and tell you why. So the chronological format resume is really just a timeline of your experience, and it starts with your most recent experience typically and works backwards. There used to be some countries that reversed the order, that had your first experience and then kind of worked forward in time. That's getting less typical even in other countries. So just start with your most recent experience and work backward. This format is really great if you are in a field that you would like to continue to be in, or if the field that you've been in is fairly closely related to your field. So for instance, when I went from hating my translation job into career counseling, I could kind of make that relevant because it was really essentially about communication. So I kept the chronological format, and I just really highlighted the communication elements to my translation work, and I also really emphasized the grad school pieces of it. So it can definitely work even if it's not exactly the same thing, but you can highlight how those two things relate to each other. A combination format resume is the format that I would recommend if you are making a larger change in your field. So let's say that after JET, you really enjoyed teaching. And so for the last 12 years, you've been teaching in a K-12 setting. And a couple of years ago, you started thinking, I would really like to get back to my first passion, I don't know, modern dance. You're gonna have to change the format of your resume a little bit to reflect more of the modern dance elements. And so what you'll wanna do for the combination format is have essentially two different chronologies. So you can take older experience and grab it and put it up on top, but you're still gonna want to work through a chronology, right? And so that's gonna say, you know, here's the most recent thing I've done within modern dance, and the thing I did before that, and the thing I did before that. And then under that, so you'll call that section something like relevant experience or modern dance experience or whatever. And then underneath that, you'll have a section called something like other professional experience. And in that other professional experience, you'll have your most recent job, and again, work backwards in time. So that's kind of what you do for a combination format resume. You do need to make sure that there's a chronology in each of those sections though, because it's very confusing to employers if there's not a clear set of chronologies. They can't figure out how long you've done things, when you did things, and it's just really kind of, it muddies things. And that's why I don't recommend, unless you have extremely specific circumstances, this functional format. The functional format is kind of any of those catch-all types of resumes that does not have a clear chronology. I've seen pretty much every stripe of this, and it's always confusing. And so you know, we can talk a little bit if you do have any of those very specific circumstances. But honestly, even if you're afraid that you've been a job hopper recently, still stick with either the chronological or the combination format resume. You should have a sample resume as well in the handouts that you've gotten. So you can kind of check what that looks like. And I'll get into a little bit more of the format here in a sec. In terms of what to put in the document, these are some basic things that are really essential. Obviously, you need your name and your contact information. A question I get really frequently about this is how much contact information to have. And so obviously you want your name. And honestly, I'm kind of a fan of the 2-page resume format. And so that means also you'll want to put your name on the second page as well. And I recommend just having it look the same on both pages of your resume, on your cover letter and on your reference page. And then it just all looks like it goes together. So just kind of your signature look. So obviously you need your name. And then you'll want at least 2 ways for them to reach out to you. And ideally also something that demonstrates your professional experience. What does that mean? It means an email address, ideally a professional one and not soccer mama 22, sexy boy 3, anything like that. So a nice professional email address that you check often, a phone number, and ideally something like a link to a LinkedIn profile, a portfolio, something like that. You don't necessarily have to have a physical address on your resume, but I really like it for a couple of reasons. One is that it just kind of makes it clearer to the reviewer, I guess, that you are a real person, kind of ties you specifically to a place. It doesn't have to be a full physical address. A city, state, and zip is sufficient. Or if you're living overseas, that could be, you know, a prefecture, a county, something like that, and then the country. Again, with the contact information. If you are living in a country that's different to where you're applying for a job, then just make sure that you have a really good email address so that if they want to reach out to you, you can have, you know, give them some instructions on like making an international phone call if they're not familiar with it and that kind of thing. And then again, some kind of sample of your work. If you like the look of a full physical address on your resume, you're absolutely welcome to put it in there. I know people are kind of worried about identity theft and that sort of thing, but honestly, my take is the resume is probably the last place where that sort of bad behavior is going to occur. So you can put it on there if you want. It's a little bit old school, but I kind of like the classic look of it. So that part is up to you. If you're in transition, moving from one country to another, you can put whichever address on there makes more sense. I don't love that kind of old school format where you have like current address, US address, or permanent address or whatever, just because I think it's weird and confusing. So I would say choose one. It's going to be easier for you to get any written correspondence. It's just kind of confusing otherwise. All right, ask me questions if you need to. Also, what you'll want on the document is your profile with your a profile with your key skills, a summary, something like that. That can be anything you think is very, very marketable. It can be anything you think is really interesting. If you would like to really speak to your Japanese language proficiency, don't just say that, you know, kind of what your score is, like what test you passed, because strangers are going to look at that and they're like, oh, what's this JLPT thing? I have no idea what this means, and what is this number 3? So you don't really rely on that kind of jargon. JLPT is known in only a very specific set of people, us, essentially. And so you can definitely talk about that, and I think it's a really great skill to highlight if you've taken the exam. But you're going to want to define it. So you'll say something like, you know, defined as conversational fluency, or just whatever. And the exam itself, I think, still has some language on it that tells you what each level means. And you can just grab that language and throw it in with those key skills. You will want to put something in about your education. They typically don't care about high school, but if you did something really relevant in high school, like if you did your first study abroad in high school, you can put that in. But don't tell them like, you know, high school diploma or anything like that. They don't care. And then you'll want a section that's your relevant experience. Again, this is as relates to what you want to be doing. And so the, you know, babysitting job you did when you were in high school probably doesn't matter. Typical rule of thumb is to go back sort of approximately 10 years. It doesn't have to be exactly 10, but that's kind of how you can gauge when to cut things off. That said, you're going to want to keep your JET experience on your resume in perpetuity because it remains really important and interesting. And so as you saw from that weird 90s picture of me, I did JET a really long time ago. It still lives on both my resume and my CV. And part of that is just, of course, that it was a really defining moment for me. But part of it is also just that I think it's a really key thing for any potential employers to see. And I feel like it's just such a deep part of who I am that I need to be able to have a conversation with people about it. If you have anything that feels really warranted on there, like activities, honors, any kind of academic accolades you've gotten, you can put that on. You can also put on anything like your community or civic involvement. And for a lot of people, that kind of stuff is really where you're going to have the most relevant experience. So don't worry if you haven't been paid for the thing that you want to keep doing. We'll figure out how to make you get paid for it, but you can definitely highlight that. And I recommend formatting it the same way you would just kind of the rest of your documents. So you'll have, you know, your job title, which could be volunteer, and then your accomplishments under it. Make sure you put your years in there so it makes sense, et cetera, et cetera. Let me know if you have questions. Again, it's on the sample, and I'll show you a page from that here in a sec. Now, people
who have questions, but I think we'll take them at the end of the section on resumes.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. Yeah, I'm seeing them coming in, but I can't really open them up without losing my flow. And pardon me, the fires keep bothering my breathing, so I do have a little bit of a cough, and it's just really annoying to me. Anyway, people who write resumes and people who know resumes are really big on these action statements, and you'll see them called things like par and car and star. Don't worry about it. What you really want to do here is pair action verbs with what you did and what happened. So that means, for example, instructed beginner classes aimed at casual travelers, resulting in self-reported greater comfort level of basic English, right? You're talking about, like, I did this thing. Here's what happened. I took on this task because, therefore. So just make sure that you're putting in as many of those as you can. Sometimes you'll have things like self-reported greater comfort. Sometimes you'll have measurable results like, I don't know, resulting in overall 2 percentage points higher grades on tests or whatever it is. So you might have some numbers, you might not, but this is the idea that you're looking for here. So here's an example that's actually from my own resume. And so you'll see, these aren't necessarily together quite this way, but you'll see that I have one of my broad skills, as I was talking about at the beginning. So yes, I taught English in Japan. However, one of the skills that has given me is this exceptional interpersonal communications and rapport building skills as shown by experiences living and working abroad, right? And then I mentioned facility with language just because depending on where you are in your career, that might be something that you want to play up or not. If you don't have that, or if you don't want to play it up, feel free to leave it off. Then further down, I have my little title here, where I did it, when I did it. And you'll see in the example that I actually have the years tabbed over, so they're on the right-hand margin. And then I've got these nice, strong verbs here about, you know, demonstrating ways to internationalize things and creating cross-cultural understanding and blah, blah. Now, fancy your point here with the resume verbs. If you are currently doing the thing, then you'll want to put this in present tense. So if I were still teaching, I would call this demonstrate ways to internationalize, right? But I am not doing it anymore. You'll see I stopped doing this in 1996. So it's in the past tense. So anything that's a one-off or that you're no longer doing goes past tense. And this also keeps it from, I've seen a lot of resumes, don't feel weird if this is you, that have this kind of weird voice. So I'll see these bullets where it's like, demonstrates ways, like, it's your document. Why are you writing it as though it's the third person, right? It's kind of weird. So don't do that. Present or past tense. All right. just some key points. Make sure that it doesn't look like the page of a textbook. Make sure there's some white space. Make sure there's some text. You also don't want it to look like, you know, a children's book. So you want some nice balance of text and white space. I really like bullet points. You'll see on this document that they kind of make this stuff easier to pick out and read. So they're nice. In the US, we don't use photos in our resumes. People will tell you otherwise, but there are a couple of really good reasons for it. The primary reason not to use a photo in your resume is that, and the reason it's actually illegal in some places, is that it can be a way that people could discriminate against you, and we don't want that. Typically, people discriminate not for evil reasons, but for things that they're not completely cognizant of. So it might just be that you look like someone's cousin and they don't like that cousin. But whatever, don't put it in there. The other thing is that applicant tracking systems, which are the bots that sort of go through the resumes and filter out the ones that don't fit the needs, can't read a photo. So it looks to the applicant tracking system like just this block of completely useless data. And so it's just gonna chuck that because it's not helpful to them. Don't go crazy with things like boldfacing and italics. Make sure that the most important information is on the top and really emphasized. Keep it professional. I saw this goofy one where this guy had worked at Subway and had all this wacky stuff about being a sandwich artist, but he had misspelled it repeatedly. So he was a sandwich artist, and it was just goofy and ridiculous. So don't do that. And again, think about that online presence and what it means. And just my pro tip is don't rely on things like spell check that can come up and bite you in the butt. So have some other people look at it as well, regardless of whether you're good at spelling or not. If there are grammar errors or spelling errors, you're not as likely to spot them as someone else because you wrote it and so you know what you were trying to say. And you're going to keep reading the thing you think you're saying, even if that's not what's on there. So this is tiny, I know, but this is a screen grab of the sample resume that you should all have. And so you'll just kind of get a sense of what the flow looks like. This is just the first page. I mentioned that I tend to like the 2-page format because you can see from this, it's hard to get a whole lot of info on there. So don't be afraid of 2 pages. And this is kind of your overall format. And go ahead, Bahia, you said there are some questions.
Yes, and actually one of the questions relates directly to what you just said. Someone asked or said that them and their colleagues, which are several former JETs in that group, they're nearing their mid-career in international education and higher education. Yeah. And they want to know, should their resumes be 1 page or 2? They are not in agreement. It seems there's been some debate. So could you share with us your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of reasons I favor the 2-page format. The first is that if you are trying really hard to squeeze it into a single page, you're going to start doing things that I think make it really hard to read. You're going to make your margins tiny. You're going to make your font tiny. You're just going to try to squeeze too much in there. And I think it just gets so unpleasant to read after a while that people will open that up and just feel tired. So that's kind of a basic reason. The other thing is there's this group called Resume Go. They're a professional resume writing service. A handful of years ago, I don't know if this is really what happened, but I imagine they were in a staff meeting and someone said, hey, how come we always say 1 page? Regardless of how it happened, they actually did a study. Now there's some caveats with this study. They had about 400 employers come in. And these are actually people who made interviewing decisions at organizations, but the caveat, of course, is that they weren't currently making a hiring decision. They sat these 400 employers down and they said, hey, pretend that you're hiring. So again, yes, that's not the real world. However, they then did their study in a way that I think was really, really intelligent. So they had the people go through a series of different resumes. And among other things, they tracked the positivity of their overall reaction to the resumes, and they tracked their eyes as the people read through the resumes. They found that across the board, the people preferred the 2-page resumes. They stated that they preferred them. They ranked those candidates higher, and they spent more time reading the 2-page resumes. So to me, that's just kind of permission to go 2 pages. The other thing is that the common wisdom, if you want to go with that instead, is that once you have around 10 years of relevant experience in your field, 2 pages just becomes warranted. So that's kind of why.
Thank you, Emily.
Sure.
A brief note, it looks like the sample resume is actually not in the Google Drive that we shared. So we'll follow up with you afterwards to get that and add it to the Google Drive. So for those of you who are asking about that, don't worry, we will get it to you.
You don't have to make notes and read this tiny, tiny font.
Yeah, we'll get you one. Don't worry about it. So next resume related question. On job postings, one of the most repeated requirements I see is strong interpersonal and communication skills.
Yeah.
It's to my understanding in resumes, we should strive to utilize the exact keywords and languages from the post. However, in incorporating interpersonal communication skills in the resume looks a bit unnatural to me, coming across as demonstrated interpersonal communication skills via X, Y, and Z. Does that sound odd? Should I rely on the hiring manager to connect the dots by the context of what I achieved on the resume?
Yeah, excellent question. And so what you want to do is kind of go for a middle ground. And so the reason you'll see a lot of that, match the words exactly kind of advice is that older applicant tracking systems were not very smart. Those old school ones, those bots just matched keywords. And so you were looking for a really clear, word to word match on those. But newer applicant tracking systems, which most people are using, are much smarter and they use some AI. So you can put it in your own language. And that said, there is an awkwardness to resume language. You should still feel like the document is yours though. So if that kind of language just feels really weird to you, you don't have to use it. But you do want to match as much of the language as feels comfortable to you. Largely because the first people who look at your resume don't necessarily understand what you will be doing. They understand what they have as the job description, which is what the hiring manager gave them, and what you put on your resume. And so they're looking to those 2 documents and they're matching A to B. And so they're looking to connect the dots. So it doesn't have to be word for word, excuse me, but it does have to demonstrate the points really clearly so that anyone who looks at the document without a whole lot of struggle can see, oh yeah, this thing matches up with what they're asking for. So it doesn't have to be word for word anymore, thank goodness. It can definitely be in your own voice, but there is an inherent awkwardness to resume and language because it's your ad copy. It's this document that is unlike anything else you need to produce in your life. And so you'll see some of the stuff on here, like, I don't think I ever have introduced myself to someone while mentioning my high degree of commitment to social justice shown through volunteerism. I wouldn't actually say that. So there is also a kind of formal awkwardness to the resume, but it should feel pretty authentic to you, if that answers your question. Email me if it doesn't, and we can talk through some of those specific questions that you have.
Thank you, Emily. Emily's contact information will be at the end. And I believe, Emily, are you also in JLink?
I don't remember.
Not, we will make sure that that happens so that you guys can more easily contact Emily. We do have a bunch of questions. We only have about 10 more minutes. So let's see what we can do to answer as many of these as possible.
Email them to me if we don't get to them.
We just brought up ATS. We did have a question about how to beat the ATS scanners, and perhaps we could talk a little bit more about what ATS is for people who might not be familiar.
Let me see if I have a slide on that. I might or I might not. Okay. Okay, no. So ATS is an applicant tracking system. It is a robot that compares your resume and the job posting. Most places are using them. I would say assume that the places you're applying are going to use them. But again, they are much smarter now than they used to be. So you can use maybe not regular English, but you can use regular resume English. You can use your own voice. They are looking for, these days, things like context. They use AI, so they're much smarter. So they're looking for context, they're looking for measurable results. They're looking for the kinds of ways that previous successful applicants have demonstrated the types of skills that folks are looking for in there. So don't make yourself completely insane doing it, but I do really like the tool JobScan, JobScan.co. JobScan is a free tool that uses old school applicant tracking systems. You paste the job description on one side and your resume on the other, and it compares them. Now it's going to be a little bit too literal. It's going to say, you know, you didn't use this one keyword, or you used a different tense of the keyword or whatever, and it's going to give you a match rate. You don't have to worry too much anymore about the specific match rate, but it is going to help you figure out if you're demonstrating the skills that are in the job posting in a way that makes sense. And it's a free, well, there's a free version that gives you 5 scans, I think, in a month for a lifetime total, I think, of 30. That could be outdated information. They change it periodically. The point is they'll give you a few in a month and a lifetime cap. So that just means not that you have to pay for the fancy version, but that you might have to go in with a couple of different email addresses. Don't tell them I told you to cheat. And it's just a really easy way to do it. It also helps you with the human side of things, because it does say, you know, this job description is clearly looking for X and you haven't demonstrated it sufficiently. It's also going to help you get past some of the stuff where the applicant tracking systems, the ATSs, are not that smart, which is stuff like the format. So, you know, it's stuff like you should use standard margins, because they often can't read the stuff that's outside the margins. It's probably too old school with formatting. So it's going to say, like, don't use columns. The reason I don't really like things like columns, I think it kind of muddies up the look of the document. But that's just kind of the quick and dirty on the ATS. I'll show you my tips. Other questions?
Thank you so much, Emily. And for those of you, I know we're getting a lot of questions about resumes. I'm happy to let you know that US JET AA, as part of our career services program, we're offering a free resume workshop. And it's open to all JET alumni. Unfortunately, if you're not a JET, we can't allow you to participate. But if you are a JET, you can sign up at usjetaa.org. Our career counseling with Emily Frank is full, but the resume workshops we are not limiting, so anyone can join. And Emily goes into more depth about a lot of these things, and it's a self-guided course that you can work through. Let's take a few more questions about resumes and then wrap up and move on to some questions that are not about resumes. One question we have about names is people who are not familiar with Japanese names often assume I'm male by looking at my name. Should I let this work for me, or should I add my pronouns like she, her on the resume?
You can do either. Typically, the pronouns on a resume or on a social media presence are a little bit more about social justice. So the reason I have my pronouns featured fairly prominently in a few different places is that I do have some trans clients who use some alternative pronouns. They, very rarely the Z kinds of pronouns. You can do that. You don't have to. You can have something on there that's, you know, Ms. Kind of an important point to me. Either way, every woman in English is a Ms., MS, period. Or if you're British, just MS. It's unrelated to whether you're married or not, as opposed to Miss, which used to be used for unmarried women, and Mrs., which used to be used only for married women. So you can call yourself Ms., or you could not worry about it. This is one of those personal decisions. Make it make sense to you. A nice middle ground is probably to just kind of put your name as it is, but have a link to something like a LinkedIn profile. And a standard LinkedIn profile does, as you might recall from that earlier slide, have a photo of you. And then you can have things like your pronouns if you want to on there. There's no hard and fast answer on this. So really just be guided by what feels right to you. There's no harm in people assuming that you're male and then you surprise them. You know, men do have a little bit more luck with the job search process. So you certainly could let it work in your favor. They might be surprised when you walk in the room, or you can do one of those things like have your LinkedIn profile, call yourself Ms., have your pronouns, whatever makes sense. Be aware if you use your pronouns that there might be an assumption that your gender is not clear, or that your gender identity doesn't match the gender you were assigned at birth. But, you know, your call on that.
Thank you, Emily. Another question came in about relevant experience. Should all the relevant experience have the same number of bullet points? For example, some positions offered more experience than others, but does it look odd for one experience to have twice as many bullet points?
No, that's totally fine. Let it be as many bullet points as makes sense. I can show you if you have any questions. I'm glad to share my CV. It's a little bit different because it's a CV, so I think it's 3 pages long, simply because I'm not looking for jobs. But you'll see that my career counseling stuff is much larger than anything else, and it has probably more like 3 times the number of bullet points that previous and yet still relevant experience has. So it's as many as makes sense in there. If you have done similar jobs or had similar titles in different organizations, I would say ideally they'd be approximately the same length. But if you have been steadily growing in your career, or if you have had kind of a portfolio career where you've done a lot of different things, the length of each entry, if you will, can be whatever it is. So like you could have a really long set of bullet points under an internship that's really relevant, and then have less information under something that has a fancier title just because you didn't have as much to say about it. So let it be fairly organic. It doesn't have to look perfectly balanced.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. Back to length, let's be brief because we're trying to get through these, but
speaking of length.
Somebody who has a CV with publications and they have 20 years of work experience.
Yeah.
What is a good length for that?
It depends a little bit on your field. So with the publications, my guess is that it might be that you are in academia. If you are in academia or medicine or any of those fields where CVs are a little bit longer, the length just is what it is. You're not even worried about it. I've known professors who had chapters in their CVs. If you are in not in one of those professions, I would say you probably don't want to go more than about 3, simply because human attention spans are what they are. And I struggle with resumes and CVs to read more than about 3 pages. So to me, that's the max. But again, because it's a CV, you also get to make some of those judgment calls for yourself, but generally 3-ish.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's 2 more. I'm going to take 2 more questions about resumes and then we'll move on. For resume making, if you are applying to a specific field, for example, teaching and education, and have years of experience, a varied experience from restaurant and food industry to retail and cleaning services, and the only teaching experience is 4 years on JET, do I add only relevant experience, even though it's very few, or should I add this other seemingly irrelevant experience?
Yeah, you'll want to give them the sense that you've done other things. So go back sort of in that 10-ish year range, but you don't have to say a lot about it. So you could have, for instance, maintained college GPA while working part-time in a busy restaurant. You can have things that are more applicable in broad situations. So that would be things like learned customer preferences, quickly and with a friendly manner. So things like that. So don't kill yourself making it feel really weird, but sort of aim for, say, 8 to 10 years, but you don't have to put a whole lot under those previous experiences. And so if you really want to talk about, for example, education, really front load it with that. And that can include anything you did that was extracurricular, volunteering. It can include anything that you've done that works with kids. So you might even throw something in there about, you know, you might have a section that's other experience working with children or other experience in education. And that could include things like volunteer work. That could include if you, I don't know, organized a weekly pickup basketball game in your neighborhood when you were in high school. So you can be pretty broad with it and then have 2 or 3 bullet points under the stuff that feels less relevant. Things like retail, food service, etc. And the truth is food service and retail tend to look really good on a resume because A, most of us have done something like that and know it's hard, and B, it shows that you don't think that you're better than, you know, some of those kinds of jobs, that you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, if you will.
Emily, and a related question we have is, I did JET straight out of college and I'm worried about the amount of experience I have compared to other candidates. As a young professional, how can I stand out compared to candidates with more years of experience?
Yeah, I was in the exact same situation, as I think many of us were. And so some of it, we might need to talk a little bit more specifically about kind of the field you're in and the ways that you want to stand out. But the best thing you can do is really kind of read through the job descriptions that you're interested in kind of carefully and really just capture how you have those skills and what your experience has been. Excuse me. And don't worry too much about the number of years of experience you have. Instead, worry about kind of the stuff that does set you apart and make you look different, unique, interesting. And the good news is that living and working overseas, particularly in a place that sort of feels exotic to some employers like Japan, that's just really interesting to them. And even if you're applying for a job at a Japanese employer, it still looks really good to them because you have enough experience with Japan and with Japanese culture and, you know, wara Nihonjin and that kind of thing, that it does still set you a little bit ahead. And so really just kind of speak to the experience you have and what sets you apart. I know this kind of doesn't answer your question because I don't know enough about the field that you're going into and how we're going to match those. But you know, let me know if you have specific questions. And as Bahia mentioned, definitely check out if you did in fact do JET as opposed to a private company, check out that workshop, which I'm still writing, but it'll be live soonish.
Yes, it'll be live in early October. You can register up to October 9th. Let's see. So we have a few more questions. We are over on time. I'm going to take a few more and then we will wrap up. Emily, do you want to go to the last slide, which I think has your contact information on it, just so that
it does.
See it? But we'll also make sure that gets shared out to registrants. Speaking of this type of lack of experience, we have a related question, which is, do you have any advice on how to switch into a field you have no relevant contacts and minimal skills and experience in?
Yeah, you don't need a whole lot of contacts. You just need one, honestly. And so find a person who works in the field you want to be in and begin having a conversation with that person. Because the hard part of switching into a brand new field is knowing what is in that field and knowing if there are any barriers in your way. So look for a single person who works in that field, excuse me, connect with that person, and then ask them, hey, I don't really have any experience in this field. How can I get more? Are there barriers I might not know about to employment in this field? How can I really look marketable to people? All of those kinds of questions. And it's really important to know what those barriers are because some of them are much larger. 15 years ago, I learned that if you want to have the job title librarian, you actually have to have a master's degree in library science. I learned this because a good friend of mine got her master's degree in library science. I hadn't known it until then. And I just wouldn't have. And so that's a fairly big barrier because that's, you know, an academic commitment. And then some barriers are smaller. Some people think you need a specific certification, but you might not. So start with 1 or 2 people that you know. And if you're having trouble finding 1 or 2 people in that field, let me know. We'll do a kind of poke round and see how we can brainstorm those people for you. But then begin those conversations and check out that informational interviewing sheet for the kinds of questions you can ask them. And when you do have a really good conversation with someone in a field that you want to get into, make sure that at the end you ask, who else can I speak to about this? And may I use your name when I reach out to that person? And you're gonna begin to build your network slowly that way. But if you have more specific questions, email me, it's right there.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think also that's another place that your JET experience can come in. If
Absolutely.
you have the JET program on your LinkedIn and you can find a JET who is in that field, JETs are always willing to talk to JETs. And so that's a really good way to, you know, say, hi, I noticed you're doing what I'd like to be doing and you were also a JET. Please, you know, would you mind talking with me for 30 minutes or even just asking some specific questions? And JETs really want to help other JETs. So 9 times out of 10, they will say yes.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's go actually to I think this is all we really have time for since we're about 10 minutes over. But this goes back to kind of the networking piece and what we're just talking about. Should I reach out to people with common interests via social media, even if they're not friends per se, if I have an idea of what I'd like to accomplish? And how do you go about that?
So to the first part of the question, absolutely. Having more contact on social media is to your benefit just in general. And how to go about it is going to depend a little bit on which social media platform you're using. I'm going to guess that you're using LinkedIn for this just because it's the easiest way to answer it. And so when you reach out to people you don't already know on LinkedIn, if there's an option to connect, you'll just hit that little button. It says connect. And then it's going to say, do you want to add a personal note? And the good news about the personal note is that it's longer than like a tweet. So you can actually say a bit, but it is fairly short. And so you'll say something like, hey there, Bill, you don't know me, but I also did JET, and it looks like your career path is really interesting. I would love to learn more about it. Will you connect with me? If it's on a more sort of friend-based kind of social media platform like Instagram or any of those, you'll just connect. If there's not a little kind of a pop-up that says to add a note, just connect and sort of demonstrate your overlapping interests and then try to interact with that person more personally. So like if it is Instagram, don't just like their posts, but maybe ask a question or engage with them in a deeper way. And on Facebook, if you're connected, of course, you can message each other. So, you know, send the person a note that just says something like, I really like that post you made, or what do you think is the biggest challenge people in this profession have? So you're just engaging a little bit more deeply than just, you know, thumbs up. Let me know if you have specific questions though.
Thank you so much, Emily. And as somebody who gets people adding me on LinkedIn all the time, I always appreciate a short note, even if it's just to tell me how, you know, why you decided to connect, or, you know, hey, I was in the transitions thing last night. Looking forward to getting to know you better. You know, even simple things like that, because I also do get a lot of ads from people I don't know who don't have a clear JET connection. And I accept everybody that has a clear JET connection. And so I think that is a good factor.
Yeah, I do. So feel free to connect with us.
All right, so we're out of time. Emily, do you have any final thoughts?
Real quickly, if you're deciding cover letter or no cover letter, err on the side of caution and write a cover letter. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love helping folks in these situations, and I know how freaking hard it is to come back from Japan and not know what you want to do when you grow up. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm really glad to help answer some questions, and I can discuss my special discounted JET rate should you want a session with me that isn't covered by something like US JET AA.
Thank you so much, Emily, for your time and your insight. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
With you. And I learn something new every presentation.
Thank you.
I'd also like to suggest that Emily's done several webinars with US JET AA. So if you go to US JET AA's website or YouTube channel, you can actually watch. We did a panel on, so you finished the JET program, now what? Emily, Rob Yu, and Kamara Tofolo all spoke on different aspects. Emily's also done another one on careers during COVID that focuses more on the specific reality of COVID, working during COVID or not working during COVID, that you can check out. And then I believe there was one more that Emily did on resumes after JET. So yeah, so check those out. We'll try to add those resources into the Google Drive and send them out to everybody. All right, well, enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow at Careers Using Japanese.
Thank you so much.
Bye.